Here's what great financial reporting looks like. Easy to read, packed with insight, and filterable for any period. But here's how most reports end up. Clunky, boring, and hard to use. The difference? Just 8 Excel formulas. With them, you can transform static exports into dynamic dashboards that power real decisions. In this tutorial, I'll walk you through step by step. And if you stick around till the end, I'll show you how you can get these dashboards connected to your QuickBooks Online data entirely for free. Let's begin. All right, so let's get to know our file over here. As you can see, we have a summarized P&L, a summarized balance sheet, and a summarized cash flow. Now, these pull directly from these detailed financial statements, which were exported from my accounting software. And I then connected these statements together to create a basic 3-statement model. Now, this is really easy to do. I'm not gonna go over that in this video, but you could just watch this video if you're not sure how to do it, and you should get the fundamentals. So notice also on this tab that I have different views. I can see year-to-date, trailing 12 months. I can see annual figures over here, and then quarterly, and lastly, monthly as such. So let's first start by building out the periods for this summary tab over here. And that'll bring us to our very first function, EOMONTH. So I'm gonna start over here with just saying 1/1/2024 for our start date. Now to get the end of the month using the EOMONTH function, the syntax is actually really simple, right? EOMONTH, point to the actual date, and then however many months into the future after you hit a comma. So in this case, I only wanna go to the end of the current month. So I'll hit a 0, close the parentheses, and hit enter. And you'll notice that it just populated the end of the month. Now, if I wanted to populate, let's say the end of next month, I could change this to a 1. And if I wanted to populate this for the end of the prior month, I could simply write a -1 as such. So let's just go back and put this as a 0 so that we have the end of the month. And now to beget the first date of the following month, I'm simply gonna just refer to this and hit a +1. Now again, I can take my same formula for EOMONTH that I had in this cell, I'll copy it, I'll paste it over here. Now I can just take this whole combination of cells, copy it, hold down Shift and move to the right, and paste as such. So it looks like it's working. Let's now populate that same information for the quarterly section over here. So once again, I'm gonna write 1/1/2024 as my start date. Now my end date is again gonna be using EOMONTH, but this time instead of 0 for the end of the current month, I'm gonna put a 2 for the end of the quarter as such. Now again, I'm gonna do the same thing by just adding a +1, and then copying this to the right. And let's just copy that to the right as such. So now we have the end of our periods. Let's wrap this up now with our annual, and I'll just write EOMONTH. Now, can you guess what number I need to put? That's right, 11 with a +1, and I'll copy. Okay, so now let's populate year-to-date and trailing 12 months. And in this case, if I go to my income statement tab, you'll notice that June is the last month of actuals. Everything else is a projection. So to make this easy, I actually, on the formula ribbon, created a named range called latest month of actuals. And I made this equal to the numeric value for June 30, 2025, so that I just need to change that each month, and everywhere that references this named range will then update. So I'm gonna write over here equals the latest month of actuals, and you'll see it actually starting to type out. Now hit a tab and hit enter. So let's copy that for both of these over here. And then for trailing 12 months, that should be really easy, right? The start date just needs to be 12 months back. So I'll again write EOMONTH. I'll point to the period over here, and I'll write -12. Now this is good, but this is actually the end of the month 12 periods back. So instead, I'm just gonna put a +1 over here. And now we have the true trailing 12-month date range. Now I'm gonna come back to the year to date. We wanna make this a little bit dynamic rather than just hard coding 1/1/2025. And I'll show you how to do that in a sec. But first, let's do another really easy function, and that is the year function to get the year. And the year function syntax is so simple. In fact, it just takes one argument, a date, and then it extracts out the year from that date. So watch, I'm gonna write equals year. I'm gonna then point to this over here, close the parentheses, and now I have the year. So I can now just copy this all the way across, and I'll speed up as I do that. Okay, perfect. So now that I have the year, I wanna do one more thing, and that's get the actual quarter. Now, this is gonna be a little bit tricky because Excel doesn't have a function that you can just type in equals quarter and point to a date, and it'll get you the actual quarter. Instead, we gotta think about this logically. How exactly can I get the quarters for each of these periods to show Q1 over here, Q2 over here, Q3 over here, and so forth? Well, first, we need to get the actual numeric value of the month that we're in. And that's going to introduce us to our third function, the month function. And just like the year function, this one is super simple. It just takes one argument, the month. So watch, I'll write equals month. I'll point over here and I'll close the parentheses. And there we go. Now I have a 1. If I now just copy this all the way through for the rest of the year, you'll see that I'm getting the actual month. Now, the reason why this is so useful is we could then divide that by 3, and based off of that, we could understand the quarter that we're in. Well, not exactly, but let me show you what I mean. So if I put it divided by 3 over here, and let's just change this to a numeric as such, and let's now copy this all the way across. All right, so now you'll see the first 3 months of the year showcase values between 0 and 1. The next 3 months of the year showcase values between 1 and 2, and so forth until we get to 4. So if we combine this function with a round function, we can then get the quarter. But it won't be just a normal round function. We need to use what's known as the ROUNDUP function. And there really are just 2 arguments. The first is the date or period that you want to round up. The second is the amount of places. So if I just put before this formula over here, round up. Now my number over here is this information as such. I'll hit a comma, and then I'll put a 0 and hit enter. Well, now we have 1. So watch, I'll just copy this all the way through, and there you go. 1, 2, 3, and so forth. Now we can take this one step further by appending a Q before this formula. So in order to do that, I'll just go after this equal sign, and before the roundup, I'll put a quotation and say Q, and then I'll use an ampersand. I'll then hit enter, and there you go. Now you can see it dynamically shows Q1, goes all the way through Q4. And if I just copy this all the way down over here, as well as to this period as such, all of my quarters dynamically update based off of the period that I'm in. And what's really great is it's not just for my monthly section. Watch what happens when I take all of these values from my quarterly section and paste the formula. I dynamically get that information, and the same thing for my years and these final columns as well. Awesome. Now, instead of this being hard-coded text, why don't we actually make this dynamic by pointing to this cell here, putting an ampersand with quotations and a space, and then pointing to our year. Awesome. Looks like this works. I'll copy that as such. Perfect. All right, now we have our dates. To get to the start date over here, we're going to utilize our last date function. And that function is called the date function. And watch how simple this is. I'm just going to write equals date over here, and now it's asking me for the year. Well, I could point to the actual year that I have over here. Then for the month, I'm just going to put a 1. And the day, I'm just, again, going to put a 1. Hit enter. Awesome. And now we just dynamically got all of our dates. All right, now before we bring in all of these values from our detailed financial statements into these beautiful dashboards, let's bring in whether we're in an actuals month or a projections month. And for that, we're going to use probably the most popular function in all of computer programming, the if function. If the condition that I'm going to set in the first argument over here is true, return whatever I plug here in the true parameter. Otherwise, return whatever I return here in the false parameter. Let me show you how that works. So remember, we already have that named range, latest month of actuals. So I'll write equals if. Now for my logical test, I'll point to the actual value here, and I'll say is less than or equal to, and I'll start typing out latest month of actuals. If so, quotations, actual, otherwise, projection. Close the parentheses, and there we go. Let's see what happens now when I copy this across all the cells here. Perfect. And now you can see we have actuals all the way until we get to June 2025, after which it switches to projections. Excellent. If you'd like to connect this dashboard directly to your QuickBooks Online data, you can easily do that using our Excel add-in, ModelWiz. And let me show you how simple it is to do that. See, I use QuickBooks Online and I don't want to go through all these steps each month. So I'm just going to click this ModelWiz button, which is an Excel add-in. And I'm just going to click this button over here called Create Financial Model. I'll click download. And what this is going to do, it's going to fetch my QuickBooks Online information and build me a full financial model with this dashboard and many others in just a matter of minutes. All right, so check it out. I have my QuickBooks detailed data pulled in over here, and I have the information automatically summarized, and I can just customize that via our website if need be for all 3 of these financial statements. And then I have this really cool dashboard, and this showcases information for whatever period that I select over here. And I can toggle if I want to see it for a prior period, prior year, or even for a budget as such. And here's also one of my favorite features. I can just click this button, and I'm just going to hit this PDF button as such. and I'll click create. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna find all the dashboards in my file, all connected directly to my data, convert them to PDF and drop a beautiful file right onto my local machine. And check it out, a beautiful PDF that I could just send over to a client or really anyone that'll absolutely wow them. Okay, now back to the video. Now let's have some fun and populate these dashboards with our values. And let's study how our data is actually structured over here. So again, we have our full detailed profit and loss with all of the values, and we want to summarize all of that data via these groupings over here. Now you'll notice I also added this extra column called summary. And I did that in all 3 of my financial statements. And the reason that I did that is because this is going to be my mapping for how I get the information in this detailed format into this summary format. And this is one of my favorite things to do in strategic finance because stakeholders oftentimes get very fatigued when there's way too much information. They prefer the highlights, the headings, the summary. So in order to get the information from this detailed view into this summary view, we're gonna utilize the SUMIFS function. And the syntax is pretty simple. We set the range that we wanna sum, then we set the criteria range for the first criteria, and then the actual first criteria. We could then repeat that for criteria range 2 and criteria 2, criteria range 3 and criteria 3, and so forth. Let me show you how easy this is. So I'm gonna go to our monthly section and I'll write equals SUMIFS. Okay, so now I'm being asked for that sum range. I'm gonna go to the income statement and I'm gonna point to the very first column of data, January 2024, and I'm gonna leave this unlocked because I wanna drag this to the right. I'll then hit a comma. Now remember, I'm being asked for my criteria range 1. So I really only need one criteria here, and that is if the information here matches to the row that I'm in. Let me show you what I mean. I'll select this entire column, and this time I want to lock it entirely. I don't want that to scale as I drag it to the right. I'll hit a comma. I'll then go to the pitch deck, and I'll point to this flag for the mapping, and I'll lock just the column by hitting F4 until just the $ before the C shows up. I'll then hit enter, and there we go. I have my value. So let me just now populate that for all the other areas of my profit and loss. All right, now this is saying I did 44,683 in net income in the period of January 2024. Let's see if that's true. If I just scroll down to my detailed P&L, I see 44,683. So now, because I have this in place with the proper dollar values, I can just select all these values, copy, and paste it to the right as such. Perfect. Now we're gonna populate the quarterly, annual, and custom columns in a sec, but let's just repeat those steps now for the balance sheet and cash flows. And it's really the same thing. So I'll write equals SUMIFS. I'll point to the column that I wanna sum. I'll hit a comma, and I'll point to my first criteria range with locking that information. I'll then hit a comma. I'll come back to my pitch deck tab, and I'll lock the column for this specific row. I'll then close the parentheses, copy that same formula that's entirely dynamic now and can be reused across all these cells across as such. Now let's do the same thing for the cash flows tab, and I'll just speed up as I do that. Perfect. And then for my beginning cash, I'm just gonna plug that as a direct reference on the cash flows tab to the beginning cash as such. Excellent. Now I can take all of this information over here, I can copy it to the right and paste, and I'll do the same thing for the balance sheet. Perfect. And now that we have all of our data for our profit and loss, balance sheet, and cash flows aggregated on a monthly basis, let's now do that same exercise, but aggregate it on a quarterly, annual, and custom basis for year-to-date and trailing 12 months. And that's where the start date and end date is gonna come into play. And for the P&L, we're actually gonna utilize that same function that we just used to bring in these detailed statements into the summary statements by using SUMIFS. But this time, it's gonna look a little bit different. Watch what I'm gonna do. I'll write equals SUMIFS. Now my sum range is gonna be the values in the monthly section. So I'll select all of that information over here, AC14 to BL14, and I'm going to lock just the columns because I want to drag this to the right, but I don't want my columns to actually move. I want to then drag it down as well while keeping my columns fixed. Now my criteria range 1 is going to be, if you think about it, based off of the start and end dates in that same period. Now with SUMIFS, you need to make sure that the sum range that you're putting in your SUMIFS has the same amount of cells in your criteria range, whether that's one criteria range, 2, and so forth. So in this case, I'm going to say this start date which I will lock because I don't want to move entirely. Put a comma. Then I'm going to say is greater than or equal to this start date over here. And let's just lock the row for that. And now I'm going to close my parentheses. Now watch what happens when I press enter. Excel doesn't like that. And the reason is because with SUMIFS, when you have these signs over here, you need to wrap them around quotations and then put an ampersand. Now if I hit OK, looks like the value is working. So we can now utilize our second criteria range. I'll hit a comma. I'll go back to my end dates over here. I'll lock these values. I'll hit a comma. And then I'll write is less than or equal to, again in quotations, ampersand the end date that I have over here. I'll then lock the row and I'll hit enter. Okay, let's double check. Does the value from January 1st to June 30th match that amount? Looks like we have 336,821 compared to 336,821. Now again, because we set up this formula with the right dollar signs in the right places, I can copy this and paste it to all of the columns in this row. But even better, I could then take all of the values in this row over here and paste it in each row coming down as such. Amazing. Now we have our summary profit and loss broken out by all of these custom columns. Now I want to do the same thing for the balance sheet, but the balance sheet is very different from the profit and loss, specifically in the way the values get aggregated. See, the balance sheet showcases information as of a specific point in time. Profit and loss shows values from a start and end date. So instead of me summing up values between these two dates, I really just want to pull the value as of this date over here. And for that, we're going to use what's known as a lookup function. A lookup function is similar to a SUMIFS function, only we're setting conditions to pull just one value from our range. We don't want to sum those values, we just want to bring in one single value. Now, there are a lot of different lookup functions that you can use, but probably the most flexible and easy to understand is XLOOKUP. Watch, we'll do it together. And here's a syntax for XLOOKUP. Now, XLOOKUP syntax is really simple. You have three required arguments. The first one is the lookup value. So this is what you're actually looking up. And then the second argument is the lookup array, the range that you want to look up that value in. The third value is what we care about the most, because that's going to return the value in the same position as your lookup value in your lookup array. Let me show you what I mean. So my lookup value over here is going to be this end date. And I'm just going to put a $ before the actual value because again, we don't want the row to move, but we want the column to move. I'll hit a comma and then I'll go to the end dates in my monthly columns over here and I'll hit F4 to lock everything. So my return array is going to be whatever value of the current row that I'm in, which in this case is going to be accounts receivable. So I'll lock just the columns so I could drag this down. And now I'll close the parentheses and check it out. 34,169 as of 6/30/2025. And if I go all the way to the right, you can see 34,169. So just like we did last time, I should be able to take this value, copy it all the way to the right, and now take all of these cells and just paste them one by one as such to pull in the values for each row as such. Perfect. Now let's finish up our cash flows. So this is going to be a SUMIFS. And because I already did this formula, I can just take all the values from a row for the special columns and I'll just paste it over here. And then I could do the same thing for the XLOOKUP function that I have over here with a slight difference. See, if I paste this over here, this is actually pulling in the cash as of the end date, but beginning cash needs to instead pull from the start date. So let me just drag this down. And instead of my lookup value being these end dates, let's bring it down to these start dates. And now let me hit enter. Let me copy that to the right. All right, let's double check. On January 2025, was our value 4,423,397? Well, if I look all the way over here, looks like it was. Awesome. Well, now we have these beautiful dashboards that we can utilize. And honestly, one of my favorite things to do is to just, let's say, hide a few columns. Like, let's say I just want to showcase our 2025 projections and the second half of the year. I'm just going to hold down Control and I'll just right click and click hide. And then I'll do the same thing with these columns. All right, so now I have a beautiful snapshot that I could really just send to anyone. And watch what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna come over here and select this range. I'll copy it and then under paste special, You can click this button here to paste it as a picture. So now you have a beautiful picture, or you can even print it to PDF if you want. Now, those 8 functions will do amazing things in your career, but if you're really serious about your Excel journey, you have to understand Power Query, which is why I made this video over here and this other video over there that'll showcase everything that you need to know to get started with probably what's my favorite Excel tool. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and throw a thumbs up or subscribe. All that stuff really helps us. I'm Josh, your CFO guy, and I'll catch you in the next one.